Pixar, the animation company that brought us Toy Story, Finding Nemo, and The Incredibles, is now in a well-established decline. And such is the extent of its decline, one wonders whether it will ever again return to the levels of its heyday, or whether it is in fact as dead as Nemo's mum. Between the years 1995, when the original Toy Story came out, to Toy Story 4 in 2019, Pixar released 22 films. Out of these 22, 4 made over $1 billion at the box office, and 16 made over $500 million. Then from 2020 to 2023, there have been 6 Pixar films, and their box office results have been appalling. Onwards, Soul, Luca, Turning Red, Lightyear, and Elemental, all combined, made less than Finding Dory. In Pixar's 28-year film history, the last 6 films they have released are also their 6 lowest grossing movies. It's undeniable that Pixar are facing some real difficulty. Laying off 75 employees just last month, it seems that the studio itself knows it needs to change its current trajectory. But why exactly is Pixar struggling so badly? Well, let's take a look at the 4 main reasons. Number 4. COVID. In late 2019 and early 2020, China's friendly virus COVID-19 became a pandemic, resulting in most governments across the world enforcing some sort of lockdown, closing all but essential services. And one of the non-essential services was cinemas. In March 2020, Onward was released, and it was one of the first major movie casualties during the pandemic. Soul was then released internationally-ish, and made just over $100 million at the box office, which is much less than its production budget. During the later stages of COVID, Luca was released to Disney Plus the same day it was released in cinemas, as was Turning Red in 2022. So out of these 4 movies that cost well in excess of $500 million to produce, their combined box office return was less than $300 million. But perhaps more of a damaging consequence from the pandemic was Disney's approach to releasing all their movies, including Pixar films, on Disney Plus, the same day as its theatrical release. This meant that families were used to watching the newest Pixar film at home, without having to go out to the cinema and pay for expensive tickets and popcorn. This course of action from Disney completely undermined the cinema-going experience, as they trained audiences to wait for Pixar films to be available at home on Disney Plus. And it will take years and years for many to unlearn this behaviour. So COVID, plus short-term thinking from Disney CEO at the time, Bob Chapek, not only affected Pixar's films during the pandemic years, but all Pixar films since. Number 3. Go woke, go broke. Now the all-encapsulating phrase can mean anything from race-swapping original characters, including forced political messages, to having openly gay and transgender characters. Wherever you sit on the political fence, it's undeniable that Pixar are being more open with political views in their movies. And the issue for Pixar is that this progressive ideology just isn't replicated in many places outside the American left wing. From centre and right wing, Asian, Middle Eastern, and religious parents, there is a large demographic of Pixar's target audience that just don't want to be hit over the head with modern day politics, especially in films for their children. And I believe just as much of a factor as, say, the inclusion of a non-binary character in Elemental, or the lesbian kiss in Lightyear, is the outside controversy that surrounds it. When a creator or actor involved in a movie will say something like this: "Well, if you can't handle representation on screen, then we don't want you to watch our film." But the problem is, Pixar really do need these people to watch. The international market makes around 50 to 70% of the box office for most Pixar films. Woke politics in their movies, and the controversy that always surrounds them, clearly isn't helping Pixar's chances of box office success. And rather hypocritically, Disney have often edited out these woke moments for certain countries, meaning that their current approach is ultimately satisfying no one, with LGBT groups criticising Pixar for doing a minimum amount of representation possible and then removing it for Chinese audiences. And then you have the conservative side not watching the movies at all because they've been called homophobic racists by the cast on Twitter. How much of an effect this has on Pixar's recent films we can't be sure, but the negative publicity surrounding their films because of the inclusion or lack of inclusion of woke politics certainly isn't helping. Number 2. The loss of John Lasseter. In 2018, John Lasseter resigned his position as CCO for PIXAR. Lasseter was accused of sexual misconduct and was one of the first major Hollywood players to lose their position in the early stages of the Me Too movement. Lasseter was accused of inappropriately touching and kissing female colleagues, which led to an apology from Lasseter, a 6-month sabbatical, and eventually leaving his position as head of PIXAR. Putting Lasseter's horribly inappropriate behaviour aside, he was fundamental to PIXAR's success over multiple decades. Lasseter directed Toy Story 1 and Toy Story 2 and the first 2 Cars films as well. On top of this, he is the executive producer and/or writer for pretty much every PIXAR film. His departure left a huge creative hole at the centre of the animation studio, a hole perhaps which it still hasn't recovered from almost 5 years later. Number 1. Stiff competition. PIXAR used to have a real monopoly on animated films, with one major release every 1 or 2 years, which was always a surefire hit. Any film created by PIXAR would be a reliable movie for parents who would go to the cinema with their children once or twice a year. But that is no longer the case. Whether it be the sheer quantity of animated films released every year, or the improved quality of the animation studios like Illumination or Sony, or perhaps because PIXAR are releasing 2, sometimes 3 films every year, the market for animated family films is utterly saturated. Since 2022, we've had Turning Red, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, Lightyear, Minions: The Rise of Gru, Strange Worlds, the Super Mario Bros. Movie, Super Pets, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, The Bad Guys, and Elemental. And most importantly, PIXAR's movies, Turning Red, Lightyear, and Elemental, have all failed financially and have not fared too well critically either. The days of The Incredibles or Toy Story or Finding Nemo being in a cultural zeitgeist is now well in the past. And in my mind, the last original PIXAR film, so not a sequel or spin-off, to have any real cultural significance, was Up. And it's been 14 years since Up's release. Yes, there's been Coco and Inside Out, which are both good movies, but they just don't come close to the likes of WALL-E or Nemo. And unfortunately, it seems that PIXAR are continuing to fall back onto previous successes, with Inside Out and another Toy Story film in production, leaving me little hope that PIXAR's got better days ahead of it. No studio can dominate forever, and with Sony's Spider-Verse films, and Illumination's Minions and Super Mario movie, it seems that the animation torch has been passed reluctantly from PIXAR to its competitors. So in summary, PIXAR is dying, if not already dead, because they haven't released any great original films in the last 14 years, they're still suffering the effects of the pandemic, there are much better films from other animation studios, and oversaturation in the animated family movie genre, and being too woke, or not being woke enough, as some would say. So now, I'd like to know, what do you think has gone wrong with PIXAR? Have you loved any of their recent movies? And can they turn a corner? Or is it too late for the once powerhouse studio? If you're new here, then perhaps consider subscribing to Film Club. I review all the major films and shows on their release, as well as the occasional video essay like this one. Thank you for watching, and see you again.